This is an important story to talk about because this is now the wake up point for liberals. Donald Trump talking about running for a third term has awakened them and finally activated their brain into recognizing that this guy is a dictator. Like, he wants to be Vladimir Putin. He wants to be Viktor Orban. He wants to be Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He wants complete and utter control of the federal government. He wants to abolish the Constitution. He wants to rid himself of any naysayers that disagree with any of his with any portion of his agenda. So let's go ahead. Let's see what CNN has to say about this.
President Donald Trump on the record saying he's not ruling out another run for the White House, telling NBC News, quote, there are methods by which he could do it. Now, the president is limited to 2 terms by the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution, but that has not stopped President Trump from flirting with this idea before.
It will be the greatest honor of my life to serve not once, but twice, or 3 times, or 4 times. Headlines from the fake news. Now it will be to serve twice. Should I run again? You tell me. There's your controversy right there. There's your controversy.
CNN's Betsy Klein is live in West Palm Beach tonight. Betsy, he said he's not joking when asked about this, then also said that it's too early to be talking about it. What more is he saying?
Yeah, Jessica, you're absolutely right that this is not the first time this has come up, albeit a little tongue-in-cheek, as you just laid out. But President Trump openly talking about the prospect of seeking a 3rd term in office, and he says this is not a joke. I want to read to you part of the transcript from the telephone interview he had with NBC News' Kristen Welker. Welker says, "Sir, I'm hearing you don't sound like you're joking. I've heard you joke about this a number of times," to which the president responds, "No, I'm not joking. I'm not joking." The president goes on to say that there are methods on which he could seek a 3rd term. Welker asked if it's possible that Vice President J.D. Vance gets elected and then passes the baton. The president indicated that that was an option, but he said there are others too. The president, of course, repeatedly said
These are complete falsehoods. Anyone with a slightly activated frontal cortex knows that it is constitutionally prohibited for anybody to serve more than 2 terms as president. And even before it was constitutionally prohibited, every president up until FDR served 2 terms because of the precedent set by George Washington. Now, whenever this conversation comes up, I've seen clips from various media companies where the commentators like entertain this idea from like a legality basis or a technicality basis. No. The 22nd Amendment prohibits it. Additionally, the 12th Amendment forbids a former sitting president who has served their 2 terms from running as vice president or of Speaker of the House. It says that they are no longer allowed to serve in succession in any way, shape, or form. It is enshrined into law that once you serve your 2 terms, you're done. Now, this, of course, came to be because FDR was immensely popular throughout his time as president, so much so that he won, of course, as we know, 4 elections. But he won 4 elections in a landslide every time. And the Democratic Party had tremendous advantages in the House and in the Senate. The reason why FDR won 4 elections is because he materially benefited the people of the United States when he was in office. What did he do? He pulled the country out of the Great Depression. He helped win World War II. He set up Social Security. He expanded, or he created, the social safety net. And people like when their elected leaders materially deliver for them, even if they are a little bit of an authoritarian, or even if they do have a few cons, as FDR does, such as like Japanese internment, prohibiting minorities from benefiting from Social Security. The reason why Donald Trump, let's entertain this hypothetical, because I do enjoy this thought exercise. If Donald Trump were to run for a third term after what these 4 years project, he would get mollywopped. He would lose in a Reagan style landslide. And we can speculate this before even the economic unrest happens as a result of his tariffs. I would also say this: the Democrats have done nothing to fight Donald Trump up against this point. But if there were a way for him to run for a third term, I would call up Barack Obama. Barack Obama has the most aura of any president ever. He has so much aura that people turn a blind eye to all of the disastrous foreign policy decisions, and they also turn a blind eye to how domestically he really wasn't, a needle mover in any way. But I know for a fact that in electoral politics, Barack Obama would dismantle Donald Trump. Of course, the appropriate answer to this is to fight Trump with someone like Tim Walz or Andy Bashir or AOC, but I know the Democratic Party establishment, unless they are forced to do that, will not do that.
It is, quote, too early to think about it. Now, the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution, it bears repeating, Jessica, added back in 1951, and it says, no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. Now, repealing that amendment would require a 2/3 vote.
This is literally the result of FDR winning too much. This is like when the NCAA outlawed dunking because of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Do you know how incredible you have to be to have the system rigged against you? All because FDR materially provided for the broader portion of the electorate. That, whenever I talk about FDR, that is always the main takeaway. And that is what I wish that more of the Democrats recognize. But of course, that was pre-neoliberalism, and capitalism has rotted the brains of the majority of our establishment politicians. But this is also why Bernie and AOC have been campaigning so effectively. The country wants another FDR-style president. Trump, on his fascist takeover, needs an opponent who is as radical as he is, just on the other side of the political spectrum. Liberalism has never defeated fascism.
In the House and Senate, and ratification in 3/4 of states. So that is extremely unlikely. However, Steve Bannon, who is a top outside ally to President Trump, has mused that the president could be eligible because the amendment doesn't specify consecutive terms. We should also note that President Trump is going to be the oldest president ever in office at the end of his second term, topping Joe Biden's record at 82 years and 7 months old in January of 2029. Asked if he even wanted to serve a third term, the president said he likes working. Jessica.
Joining me
he loves to work so much that he's golfed for like 1/3 of his time in office already. This guy, like, that's such a fucking wacky thing to say. Oh, I just love to work so much. That's why I'm going to be the president of the United States at 83 years old.
Discuss these comments. CNN contributor and former White House counsel for President Nixon, John Dean. John, thanks so much for being here with us. I first just want to get your reaction to these new comments from the president.
Well, he likes constitutional end runs. That's what Bannon was talking about. And that's what seems to be on his mind, is how he can get around the very clear language of the 22nd Amendment, which precludes getting reelected to more than 2 terms.
And President Trump said, I have other methods. What could those constitutionally be?
They'd have to be written by the Supreme Court that would redefine the Constitution. As I say, I describe it as a constitutional end run. Jessica, this is not a new debate. It actually goes back to a law journal article in 1999, where a bunch of scholars got together and looked at the 22nd Amendment and said, you know, maybe a president cannot be reelected twice, but maybe he can serve twice. How does he serve twice? He becomes a vice presidential candidate. Then the vice president steps aside and makes him the president under the succession statute. This is really obtuse. This is it is pretty good scholarship. It's been debated for a lot of years. Hillary Clinton looked at it when she was nominated, thinking maybe her president, her husband, former president, should be her vice president. But then she realized, well, he's not really eligible to become president under my reading and most readings of the 22nd Amendment. So she precluded that. A lot of people thought Obama should go for another term. He didn't. He read the Constitution and said, no, I'm not for end runs.
Yeah, no. If
How much
Barry
faith do you
would've
have in our
fucking
democratic
crushed.
system to prevent that from happening?
I think that we, as people who discuss politics at like an above average level, or I shouldn't say it like that, people who are involved in politics more than your average person would be much better off in discourse if we just acknowledged wholeheartedly that Republicans do not give a fuck about the Constitution. They do not give a fuck about institutions. None of that matters to them. For many decades now, there's been this facade that Republicans are always playing by the rules, which is not true. They've managed to build this facade despite also doing everything in their power to undermine these very institutions to keep them in power. I think that ultimately the Republican end goal in this regard is to just dismantle the Constitution and allow Donald Trump to be a king, which is an equally fascinating conversation to have because he's not a young person, right? He's an old man. At a certain time, he is going to pass away of natural causes. And then after that point, where does the Republican Party go? I've discussed this in previous videos, but there is no heir apparent to Donald Trump. JD Vance does not have the juice. Donald Trump Jr. does not have the juice. Tim Scott, Glenn Youngkin, all of these wacky, like, all of these fucking wacky diet MAGA Republicans do not have the motion that Donald Trump does. And this is corroborated by the fact that the majority of people that he handpicked in state and local elections got fucking dog walked because it very much follows the same theory of the Democrats being diet Republican on the issue of immigration, right? Kamala Harris virtually did not change anything or was not really too dissimilar from Donald Trump when it came to border policy. She was just as xenophobic. She was probably going to be just as cruel, maybe a little bit less cruel. Like she would have deported half of the migrants that Donald Trump is deporting. But the voters look at that and they think, why would I drink diet soda when I have the full calorie thing right in front of me? I think that applies to the Republican Party in general.
Well, I think the courts have held because they're being tested right now as they never have before. There's some over 100 cases that really implicate the Constitution and the system and our democracy, if you will, where Trump and Elon Musk, in some instances, are just running roughshod over the laws and the statutes that exist on how to hire people, fire people, who you can do with a statute, how do you allocate money that is appropriated by Congress. This is just being ignored, but the courts are really making the issue of the president must comply with the law. Now the question will be, will he comply with the law?
Certainly.
No. This is all by design, pal. The Republicans have spent 50 fucking years working to pack the highest level of the judiciary branch. They've spent 50 years striving for a conservative super majority. Their goal is to challenge these rulings by the federal courts and escalate them to the Supreme Court because they know that in all likelihood, the Supreme Court will agree with them. Now, that's not always going to be the case, as we saw with USAID. Potentially, Amy Coney Barrett doesn't side with Donald Trump on every issue. But even then, even if she doesn't, Clarence Thomas, definitely. John Roberts, also more likely than not. Brett Kavanaugh. The Republicans have worked tirelessly to get here, whether Donald Trump was the president at this time or not. And they're working to escalate these to the Supreme Court because they understand that the court has no enforcement mechanism. Just because the court says, no, you can't do something, doesn't mean that the Republicans are going to just fucking stop because they play dirty. They don't play by the rules. They work to get what they want.
And I'm curious, too, just from your perspective, even having this conversation that you and I are having right now, having a sitting president that's flirting, let's call it, with this idea, what does that do to American democracy?
It's not healthy. I can't tell you how depressed I have been with some of his decisions, what he's doing with tariffs. He really doesn't have unlimited tariff power. That belongs to the Congress. You wouldn't know
I
that.
think that I'm going to be a little contrarian here. Okay, yeah, we're going to get really nerdy for a second. True democracy does not have term limits. If there is a leader who is well liked, who they win every election, that is the will of the people. I myself, I don't dislike the idea of term limits, but it is obviously a handicap on democracy. It's very much like rigging the system to a certain degree, right? Let's say Bernie Sanders won in 2016 and then won again in 2020. I myself, and probably a large portion of the electorate, could potentially be arguing for a repeal of the 22nd Amendment. Maybe. I don't know. But the fact remains that if you have a leader like Bernie who was materially delivering for 8 years, the electorate would want him to remain in power. That's how FDR got elected 4 fucking times. It is more democratic not to have term limits than to have term limits. If the Republican Party is so confident that Donald Trump would win, yeah, they're obviously going to want him to fucking run. But I think that in like 2-3 years down the line, once we actually start talking about 2028, I believe that they are going to steer away from this messaging because the fallout is going to be nuclear. If the cost of living keeps rising, if people have their civil liberties continuously stripped away from them, they're going to be fucking mad. And you know what's going to happen? They're going to blame the president. The Republican media apparatus will not be able to pull the sheets up over their audience. When folks were polled about who they would blame for a potential government shutdown, they would have blamed the Republicans. They would have blamed Donald Trump and they would have blamed Elon Musk.
That given the current debate. So he's beating up on the economy. He's beating up on democracy. He's beating up on federal employees. He on last week he filed a federal action in Waco, Texas, where there's only one judge who is pretty predictable on how he comes out on things. He's very conservative, to attack federal unions, federal employee unions. So these are very troubling times for me anyway, and for anybody who loves our democracy.
All right,
For a
John Dina.
former Nixon guy saying this is fucking crazy. I think the Republicans would stop messaging this third Trump term the second that Social Security is touched in any way, shape, or form. Once seniors stop missing or start missing Social Security payments, heads are gonna fucking roll. It's also not a surprise that Republicans know they are deeply unpopular right now because they are advising that their elected representatives don't hold fucking town halls. They are cowards. They are babies. They, and by they I mean the representatives, would rather be in good graces with Donald Trump than do right by their constituents, which is particularly cowardly because those are the folks that put you in that position. You are beholden to them, not to the fucking greasy orange that's in the White House.